Before addressing trade, I want to pay tribute to the founders of UKIP. Someone said, people age, dreams are ageless. But they never could have dreamt that from that one meeting 22 years ago, there would be created a political party that would win the European elections, have over 400 councillors, and very shortly elected MPs at Westminster. I don't often quote Mr. Miliband approvingly, but he did say, David Cameron doesn't stay awake at night thinking about the United Kingdom. David Cameron stays awake at night thinking about the United Kingdom Independence Party. And today I'm talking about trade. First, I'm going to tackle 4 falsehoods. I will then present 3 truths. Now, gigantic falsehood number 1, that UKIP is isolationist. I must make it crystal clear that we want to cooperate with other countries. We want to be friends with other countries. We want to trade with other countries. And this will be through the G7, the G20, the World Trade Organization, the OECD, the UN Security Council, of which the UK is a permanent member, as well as 100 other international organizations. Of all of these, the UK is, at the present time, a full member. And I say at the present time because so long as we are in the European Union, so long is our continuing full membership of these bodies uncertain and at risk. Already, the UK's seat on the World Trade Organization, the area which I cover, is subsidiary and passive, and has been since 1975 when we first joined the then common market. It is our opponents who want our country to be a province in a protectionist European superstate. They are the isolationists. We are the true internationalists. The UK has been a leader in international trade for centuries, long, long before the European Union was even thought of. Now let me go to gigantic falsehood number 2, that the UK needs to be in a political union in order to be able to trade with the countries in it. So let's look at the figures. I should say these figures are from the European Union itself, from Eurostat. These are, as it were, the very tablets from Mount Sinai. And this slide shows trade between countries outside the EU and the EU. Now you can see, if you look carefully, the sheer volume and value of this trade. And by way of illustration, the value of the trade of the top 20 non-EU countries with and from the EU in 2013 was worth more than the entire economy of France. Even if we only take exports, China sold just short of 280 billion euros worth of goods to the European Union in 2013. And perhaps someone will take Mr. Clegg aside and explain to him slowly and gently that China is not a member of the European Union. A country does not have to be in a political union in order to trade, not remotely, not at all. We would absolutely not be leaving EU markets when we leave the EU. It is 100% that all trade would continue, and indeed, for other reasons, would actually increase. That all trade would stop is not a tenable proposition. It is just not true. The facts speak for themselves. What we are told constantly is nonsense, and worse still, it is a deliberate deceit on the British electorate. Gigantic falsehood number 3, that a country outside the European Union requires a trade agreement with the European Union in order to export. Now, see this slide here. 6 of the 10 top exporting countries to the European Union, including, by the way, the United States, do not have a trade agreement with the European Union at all. A trade agreement is, of course, desirable, which I will be coming to later, but it is not essential. And one of the reasons a trade agreement is not essential is because of the fall in global tariffs since 1980. You don't have to follow it, but you can just see the line. Now, what the EU does have is many different kinds of trade agreements and arrangements. Now, I've counted 7 different kinds. Others could probably count more. We've already looked at one, which is no trade agreement at all, but now let's look at some of the others. Now, what matters here is not the precise terms of these EU trade arrangements, and here are some more. What matters is that so many kinds of EU trade arrangements exist. They are there. They are in place. They are the precedents. Earlier on, I said there were 7, and those of you with better eyesight here will have counted, and more meticulous, will have counted only 6. And of course, the 7th is to actually be in the European Union. Now, many take the mistaken view that a member state of the European Union will always export more to the EU than a non-member state. Let's take a look at Switzerland. At football, England were better than Switzerland in Basel 2 weeks ago. But when it comes to exports to the European Union, the entire UK is in the 2nd division. As this slide shows, Swiss results are consistently 4.5 times, it's actually the average is 4.7 times over the last 5 years, better than the UK's. Again, the point is this: you do not have to be in the European Union in order to trade. Now to gigantic falsehood number 4, that a country needs to be in a large trading bloc in order to have and negotiate trade agreements. So back to Switzerland again. Yeah, this is the list of countries with which the European Union has trade agreements which Switzerland does not. And here we have Algeria, Andorra, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and San Marino. Here is the list of countries with which Switzerland has trade agreements, with which the European Union does not. I put them in alphabetical order, but I would draw your attention to China and Japan, both with rather larger economies than Andorra and San Marino, with no disrespect to those countries. And for the mathematically minded, here is another slide showing that the countries with which Switzerland has have trade agreements with which the European Union does not, have gross domestic products of 34 times that with which the countries with which the European Union has trade agreements with the European, which the European Union does not. The fact is, you do not need to be in a large trading bloc in order to be able to negotiate trade agreements. You constantly hear that by people who should know better, and it's just not true. I'm going to end up with two different points. First, on the proposed European Union-US trade agreement, also known as TTIP. We in UKIP are pro-international trade and pro-international trade for Britain. It follows that, as a generalization, we favor trade agreements. But there is never, and there never can be, a blank check. On TTIP, the fact is there is as yet no agreement at all, let alone a published text. That is likely a long way off. And indeed, on the EU's pass form, there may never be an agreement. And by the way, the EU's trade negotiations with Canada, which were by definition far simpler, those took 5 years. So in consequence, we in UKIP are suspending our judgment on TTIP until such time as there is a published text for us to consider. But of course, what we really want is for the UK to be able to have its own trade agreement with the United States, and that trade agreement with all the necessary and desirable stipulations and protections that we need and which we can negotiate for ourselves and not via the European Union Trade Commissioner. Now to three truths. The first truth, as we saw with Switzerland, is that a country does not need to be part of a large trading bloc in order to have trade agreements. The second truth, following UK exit, we as a country would then regain our ability to represent ourselves fully at the World Trade Organization and to negotiate for ourselves our own trade agreements in our own national interest, and not one as a bloc of 28 different countries with different interests, many of which are opposed to ours. The third truth is that in order to trade with people and businesses in the EU, a trade agreement with the EU is not essential. And we've seen that already with China, Russia, and the United States, none of which at the moment have trade agreements with the European Union. Nevertheless, in practice, after our exit, a UK-EU trade agreement is inevitable. We are the EU's largest market, and under the Lisbon Treaty, we have the right to negotiate our own exit terms. As we've seen, the EU has multiple models for trade. So which model is best for us, best for our country? Is it EFTA, Switzerland, South Korea? Is it even like Turkey in the European Union's customs union, but not an EU member state? In fact, we are putting forward none of these. What we propose is that the UK negotiates its own trade agreement with the European Union that is tailor-made. And if you can possibly forgive the gigantic pun, that suits our economy. That is what is the best way forward for the trading future of our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, William, for a brilliant and informative speech.